Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. We're now continuing our series of interviews, trying to make more sense of the very, very complicated, very tragic and difficult situation in Syria. So now joining us again to continue our discussion is Sami Ramadani. He's a senior lecturer in sociology at London Metropolitan University. He was a political refugee from Saddam's regime in Iraq. He contributes regularly to The Guardian, and he joins us now from London. Thanks for joining us, Sami.
You're welcome.
So let's pick up more or less where we left off. If you haven't watched part one, I suggest you do, because we're going to just pick up the conversation. We left off talking about the forces for militarization of the opposition, and that there was a split there. There was a large section of the opposition forces in Syria that did not want to militarize, that wanted something more akin to what we saw perhaps in Egypt, mass but relatively nonviolent struggle. You said that the first violent repression came from the Syrian regime, but then there were some snipers appeared shooting at the Syrian army with a clear intent to try to notch up the level of conflict and militarize it. Do we have any idea who those snipers were and who was behind them?
Obviously, this is very, very difficult to establish. But you could see that if you hear some of these opposition leaders who were calling for a violent overthrow of the regime, it is they who were more or less saying you cannot negotiate anymore with this regime. We should overthrow it. So, because there is a conspiracy theory that maybe even the regime wanted the opposition to militarize, to justify a crackdown. This is all speculative, but what is very clear is that on the side of the opposition, there were forces which I think were in a small minority who wanted to militarize, while the overwhelming majority of those marchers for reform, for democracy, were opposed to militarization.
And a lot of the push for militarization came from the Syrian National Council, who are, if I understand correctly, mostly outside Syria and quite closely linked to the Saudi governments, American governments are kind of in negotiations with them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some key figures in the Syrian National Council are well-known figures who are close to Washington. One or two of them actually live in Washington. And there is also a predominance of the Muslim Brotherhood within the Syrian National Council. And they are the best organized force within the Syrian National Council.
Because the Syrian National Council is a broad grouping of many groups and individuals. And we have talked to members of the Syrian National Council who, in fact, are opposed to the militarization, opposed to outside intervention, but they seem to be a real minority within the
If Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar succeed in bringing those forces that are paid and armed by them, then we will have a regime that will deal with Israel, that will sell the Lebanese resistance, that will sell out on the Palestinians, that will break definitely links with Iran. So there is a lot at stake. And Israel has thrown, I think, its weight behind that alternative.
So they believe the more extreme Islamist forces that are entering the fray are fodder that they can control afterwards.
Yes. They might be wrong. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. But I think they are, unfortunately or fortunately, depends on the way you look at it, I think they are not wrong. I think they can control these extremists, because this time the extremists are going in, the Al-Qaeda types are going in with known associations. They know who they are one by one. They came in through Turkey. They came in through Iraq. They came in through areas under US, Turkish, Barzani control. So they think they can control them much better. And also they are arming and financing them through old associations. There was a big banking scandal. The HSBC, Britain's biggest bank, There was a scandal, I think it also made some headlines in the United States, where that bank was uncovered to be dealing with drug cartels and with banks that were financing Al-Qaeda type terrorists in the region. So the funding for these guys is known, the arming is known. Unlike Afghanistan, they think they can control them.
Okay, before we end this segment, let's just talk a little bit more about the oppositional forces that are not involved in the Free Syrian Army, what you've been calling the more democratic opposition for peaceful protest. So what is their status now? Because now that it is militarized, there is an armed war going on. Usually in these situations, if you don't have guns, you don't have much to say about it.
Unfortunately, that is true. That's why these democratic forces feared militarization and warned against its consequences. I have their literature very early on last year saying, look, if this thing goes military way, the people will suffer. The protest movement will suffer. Foreign intervention, they were predicting it, will start appearing. And true enough, this is what happened.
In fact, we saw, just I think in the last couple of days, the new president of France, Hollande, actually called openly for foreign intervention.
Yes, he did. He did. And Saudi Arabia and Qatar and so on have been obviously on the record, Turkey as well. But you're right, France became the first power to call for military type intervention. United States is saying we supply some money, and they're also saying we're supplying communication equipment. Well, communication equipment in a war zone is war material. But also the CIA is obviously now, it's on the record now that the CIA is controlling who to arm and who not to arm from within Turkey. So the CIA has taken over control of who to arm and who not to arm through Turkey into Syria. And I think through Lebanon as well. This is my own, although they have not admitted Lebanon yet. I think they're also doing it through the Lebanon.
Okay, and Emily, given that there was such a broad stratum of forces on the other side, why does the military hang on to Assad this way?
Okay, I think if it wasn't for the militarization of the conflict, Assad would have gone long time ago. This is my own assessment of Syria, that once the demonstration started, had it not been for the militarization, I think the Syrian popular uprising would have been even greater than Egypt's. I really do believe that, because of the history of struggle for democracy in Syria, because women wanted more rights, because students wanted more rights, because of the rising unemployment, because of the privatization plans of the regime and so on. This coalition of forces, had the peaceful uprising continued, Assad would have gone. That is my own reading. And the militarization, and I hear maybe some people might accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist. I think militarization of conflicts pushed on by the Saudis, Qataris, and the United States are designed to stop the democratization of these countries. They want to stop genuine democratic forces from taking over and overthrowing these dictatorships.
Because then you might end up with a Syria that's outside all of the various spheres.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because why would a decent, democratically elected government hand over sovereignty of the people to a foreign power?
Okay. Next segment of our interview, we're going to talk about Russia and to some extent China, and more about the geopolitical jigsaw puzzle in all of this. And of course, it's the Syrian people that are caught in the middle of it all. Anyway, join us for the next part of our series of interviews with Sami Ramadani on the Real News Network. And don't forget the donate button, because if you don't click that, we can't do this.